The first thing we're going to start out with today, again with the superhero photos, the first thing we're going to look at is selecting skin with the color range command. Now the color range command has been around for years. However, in CS6 we have a new option that helps us select skin tones, or flesh as it were. And today is all about changing reality. So we're going to be taking a shot and completely changing it all day long. So we're going to have a lot of fun. So let me go ahead and toggle the visibility off and on of the layer that I created for you. Zoom in a little bit so you can see the difference on these little superheroes' faces. What I did was I darkened their faces just a little bit. Can you guys see the difference? It's subtle, but the difference is there. So let's take a look at how I did that. You'll notice over here in my layers panel that I've got a curves adjustment layer going on. And remember, adjustment layers is your way of telling Photoshop, hey, this next change or adjustment I'm going to make, please make it on its own layer so that I don't harm my original image. I can lower opacity if the change is a little too strong, so on and so forth. So I made this mask here, which is allowing the curves change that I made, a little bit of a contrast boost here, to affect only the white areas. Now the white areas, if you think of this mask thumbnail as a miniature of the whole document, the whole photo, then it's pretty easy to tell that, oh, okay, well, whatever change is going on with that curves adjustment layer is being shown through the faces, through the hands, and actually one of the stars on their superhero costume. So I did not start out with a selection of any kind. I used the color range command, and that's it. So that's what we're going to do right now. I'll zoom back out so you can see. Turn off the layer I made for you. There we go. So now let's open the color range dialog box. It lives in the select menu. You can think of it as a selection helper, so it kind of makes sense that it's in the select menu. So go ahead and give that menu a click. Slide on down to color range, and you get a dialog box. The first thing you need to do to use this tool to select skin is to use the select pop-up menu at the top of the dialog box. And here's the new option in CS6 right here, skin tones. Okay, so you want to go ahead and give that a click to turn it on. When you turn that on, let me zoom in just a hair more. When you turn on skin tones, you get another option here in the form of a checkbox, and it's called Detect Faces. And one of the things I love about Photoshop is that notice how when I hover over that checkbox, I haven't even turned it on, you get a nice little tooltip that gives you a fairly decent description of what the heck that particular setting does. And that's a nice reminder because there are a lot of settings in Photoshop, to say the least. So when you turn on Detect Faces, Photoshop tries to find blobs, if you will, of skin tones in a roundish kind of shape, and it assumes that's got to be a face. So we'll go ahead and turn that on, and you can see the selection preview here in the dialog box, and it's fairly big. At least you can see kind of what your selection is looking like. So we'll go ahead and turn on Detect Faces, and let's look at how this preview changes when I do that. See how their faces got a little bit more white? I'll turn it off and back on again. So it's trying to find localized blobs of skin tones to help you create your selection. Yes?
Lisa, how does this work with various skin tones, say, of other ethnicities?
That's a great question. Not very well. Okay, to be honest. Yeah, don't expect, this is not a magic tool. Yeah, so other ethnicities, it does an okay job. Since Caucasians are lighter and whiter, which usually has more contrast between hair and other things like that, it just does a better job. But try it. And again, this may get better and better with each version of the program. All right, so now let's look at the fuzziness slider. The fuzziness slider lets you include more or less in your selection. And it's a pure experimentation kind of deal. So you want to drag it to the right and see how more areas are being included in the selection, because the white areas denote the areas that are going to be selected when we get out of this dialog box. So this is a trial and error kind of thing. It's going to be different on every photo. So for this particular one, I can get a pretty decent selection of just the faces and just the hands by dragging this fuzziness slider down pretty far. And again, the white areas in my preview box here are what's going to be included in my selection when I click OK. Now, if you have a series of photos that are very similar, let's say a series of wedding shots of the bride and her family or what have you, and you find a particular setting here, fuzziness, let's say, along with the tech faces and skin tones turned on, that works well for those photos, you can save that setting as a preset so that when you open up those other photos, you don't have to go through all this again. Okay, so when you get it just right, you can save it as a preset by using the Save button right there. So let's go ahead and take a peek down at the bottom of this dialog box and see what other options we have. The Selection Preview pop-up menu, that just lets you control this box right here and how you want your selection to look as you're creating it. If you are getting a decent selection of the opposite of what you want, you can turn on the Invert button. See how Photoshop flip-flopped our selection? So now what was included in the selection is not. All right, so let's zoom back out and let's click OK and let's take a peek at our selection. So there we are, okay? Whether or not that does a better job than just using the quick selection tool, which allows you to paint a selection onto an image by color, we used that a couple of times yesterday. You're just gonna have to try it on your own photos. But we need to do a little bit of fine tuning to this selection. And there are a bunch of different ways we could go about doing that. One of my favorite ways is to use something called Quick Mask. Okay, I know there's some in the studio audience that were looking forward to figuring out how to create and fine-tune selections a little bit more. So Quick Mask is a really great tool to have in your bag of tricks. What you do is you press the Q key, Q for Quick Mask, okay? And immediately you get a red overlay that shows you what is not included in your selection. All right. If you were watching on the Tools panel over here on the left-hand side of the screen, as soon as I pressed the Q key, this button right here activated, okay? Or it darkened as if it were pressed in. That is your Quick Mask Mode button. So you can either press Q to go in and out of Quick Mask, or you can press this button right here. It looks kind of like the icon for a layer mask at the bottom of your Layers panel. So, and if you forget what the keyboard shortcut is, you can just hover over that button and you'll get a little tooltip, and the Q that's in parentheses is the Command's keyboard shortcut. So this is a way, Quick Mask is a way for you to paint to fine-tune your selection, okay? So what we're gonna do now, since we're in Quick Mask mode, is I'm gonna press B to switch to the regular old brush tool. This guy right here. This is the plain old brush tool that's been around forever. And I want to peek up in my options bar and make sure that I've got a soft edge brush active. And you know it's a soft edge brush because you want to activate one that's got fuzzy edges. Doesn't matter which one of these. Okay. So now I can come over to my document. And the last thing you need to do before you start painting is you need to take a peek at your color chips, the bottom of your Tools panel. In Quick Mask mode, we can paint with black or white to add more or subtract from our selection very, very quickly. Okay, so for example, if I come over to the little girl's face, and my goal is to have her complete face be white. In other words, I don't want any of that red overlay showing on her skin. Okay, I can just start to paint, and it's the opposite of what I want. So right now, I would be removing that area from the selection. So I'm gonna flip-flop my color chips by pressing the X key. It's a good keyboard shortcut to remember. And now when I paint, I am including that area in the selection. So Quick Mask, in conjunction with the brush tool, lets you paint to fine-tune the selection. So I don't want to mess with her hair, so I'm going to switch to painting with black, which is going to remove the hair from the selection. The painting metaphor I find to be really easy to use So that's why I like going into quick mask to do things like this. Over here in the little boy's face, I'm going to switch to painting with white. And we're going to make sure that we've got all of his face in the selection here. And then since some of his hair is in the selection, and I know it's in the selection because it doesn't have that red overlay on it, I'm going to go ahead and press X again and just paint over that because I don't want to darken his hair. And then I'm using the space bar to move around within my image as I'm zoomed in. I'm using the bracket keys to adjust brush size. So we're going to press the right bracket key to go up in size, left bracket key to go down in size. There are a million other keyboard shortcuts for brush size in Photoshop. However, I am a creature of habit and those are my favorites. So now I need to make sure that all of his hand is included in the selection. So I'm going to switch to painting with white again. There we go. And let's call that done. Let me remove this part of the cape by switching from the selection by switching to paint with black. And we're going to call that fine. So now when you press Q the second time, this exits quick mask mode. And you see your selection. See, now I've got a much cleaner, complete selection. And once you learn the keyboard shortcut for going in and out of quick mask, and if you use the keyboard shortcut to grab the brush tool, which is B, and then you use the keyboard shortcuts for brush size, you can fine tune a selection that you created with color range very, very quickly. All right, so now we're ready to create an adjustment layer to change the skin in the image. So let's trot down to the bottom of the layers panel and click the half black, half white circle. That opens the adjustment menu. And we're going to choose curves. We could just as easily choose levels for what we want to do here. The properties panel automatically opens. And I'll zoom back out so you can see the image. To darken their skin, I don't really want to change the color of their skin so much. I just want to darken it just a hair, add a little bit more contrast. You can use some of the wonderful presets that are available from that pop-up menu toward the top of the properties panel when you've got a curves adjustment layer active. There's a bunch of presets in there and they're useful things. They may not work on every photo, but it's worth giving them a shot. So we're going to come down here and I'm going to choose medium contrast and watch the faces of our little superheroes to see how they changed. See how they darkened just a little bit? So you could try different presets to see if that gives you the look that you want. And it's also a great learning tool when it comes to curves because the preset alters the curve. So if you make note of the points that Photoshop puts on the curve and the way they're either moved up or down in the actual curves preview here, you begin to learn what that kind of curve can do to your image. So a little bit of a learning tool as well using these presets. Okay, one more little tip here. I've got just a little bit too much red in their faces, more than I would like to see. So what I'm going to do is from the channel pop-up menu above the actual curve, we're going to choose the offending channel. Okay, so now the next thing I do to this curve right here, even though it's a straight line, it's still called a curve. The next thing I do is only going to affect the reds in my image. So if I want to lessen the reds just a hair, what I can do is set a point in the middle of this curve. And it's neat that Photoshop CS6 puts that curve in red, so it's another visual indication of what channel you're about to mess with. So if I click to put a point smack dab in the middle of that curve there and then use my down arrow keys to nudge it down. I always use my arrow keys on my keyboard when I'm creating a curves adjustment because curves works a little bit like dimmer switches. You know how if you raise a dimmer switch, the lights gradually come up, and if you lower a dimmer switch, the lights gradually go down. The points you set on a curve are as sensitive as a dimmer switch. Okay, in other words, very small movements in a curved point can bring forth large changes in your image. So that's why I use my arrow keys instead of the mouse, because I tend to overdo it when I use the mouse, okay? So I'm gonna nudge this point down just a little bit and see how the red is coming out of their faces as I do that. I'll bring it back up. I didn't want to bring it down that far, but trying to make a point here. So if I drag that point upwards, I'm introducing more red. As I nudge it downward with my arrow keys, I'm getting rid of a little bit of the red. So I don't want to get rid of too much, just enough where you don't think that their faces are blown out. So now let's take a look at the before and after by toggling the visibility eye off and on. So there's our before and there's our after. And so that was with nary a selection. Okay, we used the color range and CS6's new skin tones and detect faces options within color range. So let's look at how to do that on another image, because repetition is good, right? Hello, Photoshop. There we go. So here again, we've got the same kind of situation. Here's our before and our after. So I warmed up our pasty superhero skin just a little bit. You know, sometimes superheroes don't get to get outside in the daytime, so a tan is not high on their priority list. So let's take a look at how to create this. Okay, so we're gonna click to activate the photo layer. And we're gonna go up to the select menu and choose color range. Scoot it over so we can actually see our dadgum image. Why the color range command doesn't come up in the properties panel? I wish that it did, but maybe the preview wouldn't be as large. But then again, the curves preview is pretty big. So that's my request, Adobe, for CS7. I would like color range available as an adjustment layer in the properties panel. Thank you. So let's change the select menu to skin tones. And then we'll turn on detect faces automatically turned on this time, because the last time I picked skin tones from this pop-up menu, I turned it on, so Photoshop remembers that and tries to be oh so helpful. So let's turn it off real quick just to take a peek at how the selection changes. So here's off and here's on. So as we change the fuzziness slider, as we drag it to the right, we get more and more of those skin tones in our selection. So in this particular image, detect faces didn't really do anything. And again, that will all vary on an image by image basis. So again, if you drag the fuzziness slider to the right, you're increasing the areas that are in your selection, you're adding. And if you drag it to the left, you're decreasing. So you want to find kind of a happy medium. You don't want to select too much. You don't want to go overboard with this fuzziness slider, because then you would have a lot to remove from your selection once we close the dialog box. So I'm going to leave it set about right here, around 30 for this image. And we'll click OK. Now we have a little bit of cleanup work to do. Some of his throat area are not included in the selection, so I want to add that. Again, we're going to use Quick Mask, which is a great way to use the brush tool to fine-tune a selection quickly. So we're going to press Q to pop into Quick Mask. We're going to take a peek at the color chips, the bottom of our tools panel. Okay, black is going to remove areas from the selection. Okay, so you want to paint across areas you don't want to change. Here I've got a little bit of the red overlay of Quick Mask showing up on his throat, which tells me that that is not included in the selection. So I'm going to press X to flip-flop my color chips, and just to make sure that I've got all of his face in here, because we're going to give him a little bit of a tan so he's not quite so pasty. Now I want to exclude the hair from the selection, so I pressed X to flip-flop my color chips so that I'm painting with black. Use the bracket keys to change brush size. And zoom in a little bit by pressing Command plus or Control plus on a PC in order to see his hands. And now I have a little bit of the red overlay on his hands, so I'm going to press X to flip-flop my color chips so that I'm painting with white. And then as I paint across his fingers, I'm adding all of those tones, those pixels, to my selection. I absolutely love using quick mask mode. I use it all the time. It is worth noting, though, that since its keyboard shortcut is Q, you do have to be careful. If you just accidentally hit Q on your keyboard, a lot of your Photoshop tools and menu items will cease to function because you will be in quick mask mode. And if you just hit the Q key and you did not have any kind of selection on screen, absolutely nothing changes in your document. There's no indication that you're in quick mask mode except for the little button on the bottom of the tools panel and the words quick mask in the documents tab. So that's just a little troubleshooting technique for you. Tip, if Photoshop seems to have lost its mind and nothing is functioning, you know, make sure that you haven't accidentally popped into quick mask mode, because that can happen. Okay, so we're gonna call this selection good enough. This is a funny picture. Okay, so we'll press Q to pop out of quick mask mode and see our selection is all cleaned up now. So now to warm him up, if I don't necessarily need to change contrast or anything like that, I'm just gonna use a warming filter. And those are happily available as an adjustment layer. So we're gonna trot down to the bottom of our layers panel once again and click the half black, half white circle. This time we're going to choose Photo Filter. Photo Filter is a really handy tool to use when you just want to do a quick change in the color of lighting. So if you want to warm somebody up like we're about to do, or if somebody looks too warm and you need to cool them off, then you can introduce blue tones instead of gold tones. So we'll go ahead and give that a click. Photoshop opens it up in CS6 in the new Properties panel, and you've got a wonderfully handy preset menu here that has oodles and gobs of different filters in there. I'll zoom out a little bit so you can see his face. So as we go through the different filters, I'll turn up the density a little bit. You can think of density as strength. Why it doesn't say strength is anybody's guess. So as I go through the filters, you can see the change happening on his face. See how that's a cooling filter which introduces blues? You can see the color that it's using right here in this little color swatch. So we could quickly go through here and find a filter that gives him a little bit more of a warm glow. And we can use the visibility eye to toggle the change off and on so you can see if you like your work or not. And if you don't find a color in the presets menu that works well for you, you can always introduce your own color by clicking the color swatch, and that simply opens the color picker. Okay. Preserve luminosity means you're going to keep the brightness or lightness values of the area unchanged. You can see what happens when I turn that off. See how it darkens his whole face? Well, by leaving that on, I'm retaining all of the lightness and brightness values that are in his skin tones. In most cases, when you're dealing with humans at least, you want to leave that on. But if you're dealing with other objects, it just depends on the lighting that was in the shot. So give it a shot with it off and on and see which one looks better. All right, now let's go back to our layers panel. Another great thing about using these adjustment layers is that if you decide by toggling the visibility off and on that the warming filter looks good but it's a teeny bit too warm, well, you can always just drop the opacity of that particular layer at the top of the layers panel. Okay, so you can use the opacity setting right here to change that. Or you could simply go back into the photo filter by double-clicking its layer thumbnail, and that opens the adjustment back up in the Properties panel, and then you can change the density if you would like to. So a couple different ways to fine-tune that effect. So here's our before and our after. So one more for good measure, and then we'll take questions on this technique. So here's another one. This time what we're going to do is add a little bit of contrast, a little bit more here. All right. Make my layers panel a little bit wider so you can see what's going on. So we'll turn that layer off. Again, we'll click to activate the layer that contains the actual pixels. It's worth noting that if you buy this course and you're using these exercise files at home, if you have the adjustment layer active and then you try to go to the color range dialog box, you're going to get unexpected results and Photoshop will squawk at you because there's no pixels on that adjustment layer. So do be sure that you're on the layer that actually contains pixels, the photo. Okay, so we are now. So now we'll trot back up to the select menu, choose color range. Again, we're going to change the select menu to CS6's new skin tones option. And boy howdy, for this image, we pretty much don't have to do anything. I mean, it did a great job. And that's what I mean. The success that you'll get with this new command will vary. Your mileage will vary. So we can, let's toggle the detect faces off and on. For this particular image, leaving detect faces off actually does a better job because it doesn't include as much of her hair. That's a challenge because her hair is darn near the same color as her face. So you can't fault Photoshop for including some of her hair in there. Again, use the fuzziness slider to tweak the selection. We're going to call that good. Click OK. Pop into quick mask mode by pressing Q. If there's any areas that you need to remove from the selection, such as her hair, let's go ahead and paint those with black. There we go. And then I'm going to remove the red overlay from this area in her face. I'm going to include that area in the selection by pressing the X key and painting with white. And then quickly come through here using my keyboard shortcuts to fine-tune the selection. I just want to make sure I get all of her arm. And I accidentally included a little bit of the background in the selection, so I can quickly fix that. Hopefully you're seeing what a difference using keyboard shortcuts can make in your productivity. I am a huge fan of keyboard shortcuts. All right. Let's call that good. Press Q again to pop back out of quick mask mode. And then we're going to create our curves adjustment layer. Use the half black, half white circle at the bottom of the layers panel. And here again, let's just cycle through the presets and see if there's one that we like. Okay, so all kinds of things you can do. So we'll turn this off and on to see the before and after. Let's say I like that better. And that's how to use the new skin tone option in color range.